Welcome friends, it's another makeup and music. This is a very heavy one again, but a very important one I think, and I want to thank my friend Vaughn. Me and Vaughn have been friends since we were wee little girls, and I just love her to pieces. This is Vaughn. Go check out her socials. But I had been thinking about doing Billie Holiday, and she suggested it, so I was like, that's my sign. Also, Billie was one of my Mimi's, my grandmama, my Mimi's favorite artists. And I can remember her saying, they done that woman wrong. So I've grown up listening to Billie, and I didn't know a whole lot about her life, but I watched the United States versus Billie Holiday, and I've watched some other documentaries in making this that were... Once again, I do these with all the utmost respect, all the adoration I have for these artists. And this is just a video where I've compiled information from around the internet, from other media sources, into one video. Of course, I cannot fit everything into, you know, a video that's 30 minutes to an hour. It's just not going to happen. So feel free to research yourself if you're interested. Also, trigger warnings. There's a lot in this one. We're going to discuss SA, we know what that means on YouTube, severe racism, drug use, abuse, just all the things. And if you don't think you can handle it, I totally understand. Protect your peace, protect your mental health. We get it, and I completely understand. So with all that said, let's jump in and talk a little bit about one of my favorites, Billie Holiday. Normally I have my brows done, but not today because we're gonna do them a little 30s style. So Billie Holiday was born Eleanora Fagan, and she made her debut on this earth on April 7th, 1915 in Philadelphia. Her mother Sadie was an 18-year-old cleaner, and her father was a 16-year-old guitarist. Her parents were never married and they never lived together, and she grew up on the mean streets of Baltimore. Billie was a fiercely independent child. She had to be. She didn't really have a lot of supervision or familial support, and it is said that even as a child she cursed like a sailor. She was not a child you would want to mess with. She was tougher than most adults. Unfortunately, one night when she was 11, she was essayed by a neighbor, and we know what that means here on YouTube. And this disgusting individual was given only 3 months, and poor Billie was punished. She was sent to the House of Good Shepherd for colored girls. Their title, not mine. These brows are definitely sisters, not twins. And Billie had a way about her that the nuns obviously did not take kindly to. And once she claimed that, and when I say she claimed, I believe her obviously, she claims they forced her to stay the night with the body of a deceased girl to teach her a lesson. I want to know what lesson that was. Dadgum. Now in 1928, Billie and her mother moved to Harlem to find the jazz era in full swing, and back then Harlem was the place to be. Now Sadie and Billie paid the rent by working in a brothel. And the law finally caught up with them, and they were both arrested. And that poor baby girl was only 14 years old. She was claiming to be 21. And at the time, she was doing what she had to do to survive. And Billie would always do what she had to do to survive. But she was arrested for prostitution, and she was sent to Welfare Island, just off Manhattan. And our girl spent 100 days at a workhouse. And when she got out, she knew she did not want to go back to the brothel or to prostitution. So there was a group of singers and dancers and comedians who would go from club to club and they would perform for free. She would go from table to table singing for people. They could be tipped, but when they were tipped, they couldn't take it by hand. They had to, let me choose my words carefully. They had to take it by being slipped into intimate areas. Wink, wink. But they said Billie refused to do that, and I can only imagine that would be super triggering for her considering everything she had gone through. So she was singing in a club one night when record producer John Hammond came in and spotted her. He had never heard anything like her before. She absolutely blew him away. He said she sang like a horn player, and Louis Armstrong being her inspiration and her idol, she said she wanted to sing how Louis played trumpet, and that's how she got her sound.
There, baby, make up your mind, 'cause I've been waiting such a long, long time.
She modeled her way of singing after the way Louis Armstrong played the trumpet. So he teams her up with Benny Goodman, and some of y'all are too young to remember Benny Goodman. I'm barely old enough to remember Benny Goodman, and only because my grandma listened to him. But that's when she cut her first album. And even though she was now a recording artist, she could care less. She was still that little girl from Baltimore. Maya Angelou knew her and said that she would cuss with the deafness of an ice skater doing figure eights. Like, it was just part of her language. Even though women weren't supposed to use that type of language, it was just part of her vernacular. She just couldn't understand why anyone cared how she talked. Next, she starred in a short film with Duke Ellington, and that would be her next big break. After this, she felt like she needed someone who could help manage her. So she turned to a man who was already managing her idol, Louis Armstrong. His name was Joe Glazer, and Joe came out of Chicago. He was allegedly part of the Al Capone crime family, and he was described as a foul-mouthed tough guy. And the first thing he did was he wanted her to lose weight and look after herself. Her weight was always up and down, and this is truly messed up, but he always gave her money and he was very supportive. It sounds like he was pretty good to her at the time, other than the whole weight thing, which is still messed up. Now, Billie's star was rising and she was making appearances regularly at the Apollo. She was making records, but then in 1937, Billie's father, Clarence, died, and he had pneumonia but hadn't been able to find a hospital that would treat black people. And although she had never seen much of her father, she of course was distraught, but her way of dealing with it was to throw herself into her music and into her work, and this is when she decided to go on tour with Count Basie. Now, the discomforts of road tripping did not bother Billie one bit. She spent most of her time in the back of the bus playing dice with the boys, and they said she would take the band for all they were worth, and sometimes they would have to borrow money back from her to eat during the week. And they said that she was like one of the guys, but they also said that she was a lady, and that for as tough as she was what she needed to be when she needed to be it. But this was the 30s, and it did not matter how popular you were. It didn't matter how big of a star you were. If you were black, you were always treated as less than. And when they would go on tour, they were not allowed to stay at the hotels. They had to stay with other black families. You couldn't eat in the same places. You had to eat out back. If you had to go to the bathroom, you couldn't go where everyone else went. It was just a whole shameful mess. Now, Lester Young was her sax player. Many called him her soulmate. He was her best friend in the world, and they weren't even lovers according to most people, and according to them. But they spent all their time together. If they were riding on the bus, they were sitting next to each other. If they were eating, they were sitting next to each other. And he was actually the one who dubbed her Lady Day. They called Basie the Count. They called her mom the Duchess. They said they were a royal family, and so he dubbed her Lady, and she called him the President, which would garner him the nickname Prez. So after Count Basie, she went on tour with Artie Shaw, but Artie Shaw had an all-white band, and this was a first. Touring with an all-black band was hard enough. This was even harder. Artie met Billie around 1930, and he had always told her if he made it big, he wanted her to come sing with him. And he made good on his promise. He recalled one time when they were on tour, and they were in Kentucky, and a sheriff pulled them over and began to make racial comments about Billie, and evidently it turned into an all-out brawl. Artie wound up cracking someone over the head with a clarinet, but it was a constant struggle while she was touring with him for Billie to find accommodations, because the band could always find a place, but most hotels would not allow black people to stay there. So apparently they were staying at the Lincoln Hotel, ironically, and she was told she had to take the freight elevator, and she was like, I will not, and she actually quit the tour right then and there. But fortunately she got back to New York at just the right time, as there was an opening of a new radical nightclub called Cafe Society. It was the first and only integrated nightclub in New York. It was started by Barney Josephson, and he wanted a place where skin color didn't matter, where black and white people could gather and have a good time together. And while there, Billie met Abel Meeropol. He was a communist poet, and he had written this amazing poem called Strange Fruit. So Billie decided she wanted to make this into a song. Music was written, and she recorded the song Strange Fruit. And if you have never heard this, I'm gonna link 2 videos. I'm gonna link one, the original of Billie singing it, because it is the most gut-wrenching, heartbreaking, soul-crushing song you've ever heard in your entire life. I'm also gonna link a version Audra Day did of it, and there's a movie that recently came out on Hulu, and it's called The United States versus Billie Holiday, and it's about how they basically framed her and tried to make an example of her. And of course this is before and then leading into the civil rights movement. I recommend it, but I recommend it with caution because there is some super horrible stuff. Obviously we know our history, some of us do, but it's very hard to watch. But Audra Day plays Billie Holiday, and she did Strange Fruit on, I think it was the Grammys or the Oscars, so I'll link that performance also. Now, some people would get offended and indignant when she would sing this song, and I'm like, sir, if it makes you feel some type of way, it should. But this was when the government would begin their vendetta against Billie. They said it incited violence. How can they have outrage against a song that is just the facts of what is going on in America at the time? Perfect picture of hypocrisy. So yeah, I truly can't wrap my head around the ignorance. And actually, the story goes that one time a man said, I'll show you Strange Fruit, and proceeded to show her an obscene drawing he had made on a napkin. And so she proceeded to pick up a chair and bust it over his head. And that was that on that. Now her record label would not record it. So Billie chose to record it on an independent label. Sorry, I keep putting this mirror in front of my face. And she released it on, like I said, the independent label. And it may be the most profound song in American history. And actually, Time magazine named it Song of the Century. But this wasn't until later. And she knew there were ways in that time period that she could fight and ways she could not fight. And this was a way she could fight. But from white patrons in these clubs to the President of the United States, they didn't like that she had a voice. in these matters, and they were determined to make an example out of her. In 1941, she married Jimmy Monroe, and Billie's mama hated him. She said he wasn't nothing but a pimp, and unfortunately, it would be Jimmy who introduced Billie to opium. This relationship did not last long, as Jimmy had a wandering eye, and Billie wrote the song Don't Explain about Jimmy. She began a relationship with the famous Orson Welles. Also, as her bass player put it so sweetly, she had lady friends too. And Billie's female love interests included Louise Crane, who was a wealthy heiress, as well as actress Tallulah Bankhead. But her next male love interest was trumpeter Joe Guy. And who got who interested in what is not clear, but they both began using heroin. And he was her dealer as well as her lover. And as her addiction grew, it began to take a toll on her career. She would show up late if her stuff didn't get there on time. And if it was late, she would have people go on for her. And speaking from experience with opiates and caring for people with opiate addictions, you are as sick as a dang dog if withdrawal kicks in. It's not really something you can push past. Now, Billie was making around $1,000 a week, and back then, that is a fortune. But she was spending it all on her addiction. And her pianist said it was just a complete tragedy to watch someone with this raw God-given talent just wasting away. In 1946, she was offered a part in the movie New Orleans, and as a black woman, her casting, she was cast as a maid, which was predictable and offensive. But in this movie, she got to appear with her hero, again, Louis Armstrong. My bass is working my nerves since I started using tretinoin again. Nothing wants to sit right. It's a blessing and a curse. So if I look crusty, I apologize. It just is what it is right now. I hydrated, but it doesn't seem to want to cooperate. Anyway, so through the shooting, Joe Guy was traveling back and forth, keeping her supplied with heroin until Joe Glazer had him banned from the set. Joe Guy had an interesting way of getting her drugs. So they said that Billie had a boxer, like a boxer dog. And he would take the dog with him to get her drug. And he would put the drugs under the dog's collar and then walk the dog back, send him to the doorman who knew to let the dog in, and go up to Billie. So that there was never anyone really handing her drugs. Now that's a story one of her bandmates told. This is allegedly. I thought it was interesting. And Billie had 2 dogs. She had a Chihuahua, who you'll see pictures of, and she had a boxer named Mr. And look how cute Mr. is. Joe was at the point where something had to be done about Billie's addiction. So he got her checked into a hospital to wean her off. She stayed 2 weeks, but eventually the nurse was actually getting drugs to her. Now, not long after, she was performing in Philadelphia when her pianist was collecting things from her room in the hotel where they were staying. And the popos showed up. They ransacked her room and found her stash in a lady's stocking. But see, the government had been tailing her. They had hired a black man named Jimmy Fletcher, who was an FBI agent, to tail her. And he did this by gaining her trust and becoming part of her inner circle. And it was actually her manager, Joe Glazer, who had been tipping them off. So it was Bobby Tucker, her pianist, and her that were arrested. Well, Bobby got released, but Billie was charged with possession of heroin. And upon taking Glazer's advice, she declined legal counsel, which, what the heck? But this had never happened before. She trusted Joe, and he kind of betrayed her. But he He thought he was doing what was best for her. He thought her going to jail would be the only way to save her. So she goes in to court and she is expecting them to sentence her to rehab. They do not, because the government was out for her. So everyone was shocked when they handed down Billie's sentence. She got a year and a day to be served at a prison in Alderson, West Virginia. She refused to sing a note while she was there. The people that worked there said she was great. She, you know, just kept her head down, tried to serve her time. And of course, I bumped my nose, so we're gonna have to wait for that to dry, so that's gonna sit there. So Billie was eventually released on parole in 1948 and sent to live with Bobby Tucker, her pianist, and his mother in New Jersey. And when she came out of prison, she had spent 9 months with nothing stronger than a cigarette. But as soon as the train stopped in DC, she scored some dope. Now, jail meant that she had lost her cabaret card, and you had to have a cabaret card to perform at the clubs. So a comeback was scheduled at Carnegie Hall. And she was absolutely convinced no one was going to come see her. They thought this whole year everyone had forgotten her. And of course they had not. How could they? And after all she had been through, she was still in shock when it sold out. People still loved her. They still cared about her music and still wanted to hear what she had to sing. And still not being able to work was a problem. But she met John Levy, and he was the owner of Club Ebony in New York. And John was a pimp, like a real pimp, a hustler, a low down dirty shame. He promised her work and they became lovers, and then he became her official manager. Her friends say there was absolutely nothing redeemable about this man. Nada. Now, this man, if you want to call him that, used to beat the crap out of her. To the point that one time, he kicked her so hard in the ribs, she had to be bandaged up and bound. Like the people in her band and her friends had to bind her ribs so that just so she was able to sing. He broke her ribs. And for whatever reason, I think those of us, and I'm not going to speculate, I'm just going to talk about my experience. And in my experience, some of us who have been in physically or mentally abusive relationships, it comes to just be what's expected. And as weird as it sounds, sometimes the chaos can become comfortable. And her friends say she was a fighter. Her bandmates say she fought like a man. And these are not my opinions. These are just things that they said in interviews. But they said growing up the way she did, it was kind of a necessity. And in every interview of everyone who knew her, they all said she was a bit of a masochist. Now, I don't think it's necessarily a good idea to psychoanalyze people who are no longer here. This was their opinions. And they also said she had an addictive personality. So whether it was a man or a woman or drugs, she would become hooked. And it was just one extreme or the other. Now, Jimmy Fletcher, the agent, said that Levy was an informant and he wanted Billie dead. But that wasn't going to happen. So he turned on her and had someone snitch and tell the FBI where they would be and what drugs they would have on them, allegedly, according to Jimmy. And when they got to San Francisco, the law caught up with them. So she and Levy were arrested in San Fran, and they were charged with possession of opium. But she was smarter this time, and she checked into a rehab, Twin Pines. Sorry, I'm gluing. Before her court date, and was found to have no drugs in her system. So that helped her out, and she actually just got probation. Not long after this, Louis McKay came into her life, and for the life of her, she was bound and determined to find just the worst possible men. But in '54, she went on European tour. She went to London, and McKay had the idea for her to write an autobiography She asked her friend and journalist, William Duffy, to help, and the publisher was hesitant because of all the coarse language she used, so it wasn't particularly well received. Then she and McKay were arrested a third time for heroin and cocaine. In an interview, Maya Angelou said that she told her that if they sent her back to jail, she would unalive herself. Fortunately, she only got probation again this time. And that sneaky, slimy McKay convinced her to marry him. So his excuse was so he wouldn't have to testify against her, which didn't even come up anyway. But this man was spending all her money. Now, Billie was spending a lot of time with her friend William at this time. She told him a story about how when she had gone to stay with the nuns, she was pregnant and they forced her to have an abortion. And she told William, all I wanted was that baby. And that was a void that she would never be able to fill. She had a godson, and he talked about how she would even nurse him and treated him like he was her own. It was the sweetest relationship. She said in an interview that in her heart, all she ever wanted was a big house and lots of children. But McKay was bound and determined that that dream would never be fulfilled because he was just blowing her fortune. Billie's substance abuse was really beginning to take a toll on her voice and her body, and she would use alcohol to get through her sober periods. What she called her sober periods, because back then alcohol was super acceptable. When McKay could no longer control Billie, he packed up and left and moved to California. At this point, Billie was alone. She had pushed people away, which we often do when we're in addiction, and she was just sinking further and further into hopelessness. She had finally got Ray Ellis, an arranger, to work with her on a new album, but she wouldn't show up when expected to. They would record, and you can listen to these recordings, and she would be so intoxicated. She was slurring her words. It's just heartbreaking to listen to. But actually, many believe that album, Lady in Satin, to be one of her greatest works. Maybe because as artists, and this goes for all artists, we tap into our joy and our pain, our memories, our emotions, and there is a lot of life on those performances. In 1959, she came to London to perform on a show called Chelsea at Night. Her friend said Billie would not let her leave her side. She had become incredibly paranoid, and to be fair, I'm sure some of that was the drugs, but with all the shady stuff the government had been doing, it was valid. And when she returned to the States, she found that her longtime friend and band member Lester Young had died. She was devastated, and her grief was compounded by the fact that they would not allow her to sing at Lester's funeral. So as she's sinking deeper and deeper, a few weeks later, completely emaciated, she collapsed. One hospital would not even take her, and she was eventually admitted to the Metropolitan Hospital, suffering from liver failure. She had cirrhosis of the liver, sorry I'm doing my lips, from all the years of drinking and daily drug use. And I will share with you guys, I lost my big brother 3 years ago due to complications from cirrhosis of the liver. She did begin improving a little bit, but one day a nurse said they found some white powdery substance in her room, and it is widely speculated that when government officials visited her, they planted it there, but they tried to arrest her again for possession, but she was threatened with immediate imprisonment unless she gave up the name of her dealer, and she was like, screw these people, I ain't saying jack. And the DA fortunately was persuaded to postpone the case until she could stand trial. In the meantime, her vulture of a husband, McKay, had flown in, and he was just the worst. God. Her friend Bill said while he was there, Billie was playing possum, pretending to be dead, and when he was gone, her friend Bill came in, and she opened one eye, she's like, is he gone? And he was like, yeah, he's gone. I'm gonna spray this mug and come back. So this is the look. We're not doing anything to the hair because I've still not had a haircut. But you know who has? Bowie got a haircut. He's so sweet. She was terrified of dying penniless, and with Louis around, that was a distinct possibility. So she managed to commission her story of her addiction to Confidential magazine, which paid her $750. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but in those days it was about $7,000. And she actually had to hide it in her nether regions so he couldn't get it. And while funny, imagine having to do that. It's incredibly sad. So she was arrested in the hospital. She was handcuffed to her bed. The government was waiting for her to be released so that they could take her in. But Billie would never leave the hospital. On the 17th of July, 1959, Billie Holiday passed away. And a little after midnight, the nurse came back in to see Bill, and she asked, "Are you Bill?" And he said, "Yeah." And she said, "This is for you." And she handed him the money Billie had stashed. Billie passed away from heart failure due to cirrhosis of the liver. For those that don't know, it causes multi-organ failure, and that can be one of them. And Billie was only 44, which blows me away because that's how old I am. Now, all her friends agree Billie never did anything she did not want to do. She was who she was. She made no excuses for it, and she never apologized for who she was. She was a fascinating and multifaceted woman, and she was one of those rare artists who could just sing her truth in a way that captivated people. And while part of her life is a cautionary tale, there is so much to admire about Billie, and she is still one of my favorite people and one of my favorite artists of all time. So I really hoped you guys enjoyed this. Please keep the suggestions coming. I really appreciate you guys hanging out for these, and I'm gonna try to start making some other content too, but we're gonna try to do these every 2 weeks, so make sure you let me know what you want to see. I'd even take some ideas for some looks you'd like to see. I appreciate all of you, and again, check the description box for links, and I will see you next time. Thanks for hanging out. Bye.